Susquehanna.
Okay.
Monongahela.
Ohio.
Platte.
Quinnipiac.
Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be tonight's host. With us we have a gentleman, as you might have guessed, knows a lot about water. His interest locally is the Still River, and I'm sure most everybody's heard of the Still River, but Dave Bonan, our guest, is going to educate me and anybody else that might be listening about the Still River. So, what is this Still River that we all kind of know about, but nobody knows much about where it is?
Still River is a river in Danbury, Brookfield, and New Milford that is colloquially known as the Still River for more than 100 years, mostly because industry from the hatting factories polluted it over the years that nothing could be living in it or sustained, so it was known as being a dead and lifeless river or the Still River.
So the hatting industry, of course, things like lead and other types of materials was, I'm hearing that you say it was dumped into the river, which created pretty much a toxic environment for anything that
toxic soup.
Toxic soup. Ah, okay. And if it was toxic, how did it, or has it become non-toxic? Has it healed?
It's healed. I'm not a water quality expert. We're making a documentary, as you know, but Meg Ruda is actually, shout out, she's the water protection manager for the Housatonic Valley Association, and she's featured in our movie, and she's the water quality expert. She could talk to you as a guest, I'm sure, about that, but there were no EPA regulations hundreds of years ago for dumping. So in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s, when that came, rivers got cleaned up around the country. The Still River is as clean as it's ever been right now. Thriving fish populations. The Still River Greenway in Danbury is stocked 3 times a year by the DEP with rainbow trout and bass, and local fishermen that I've met on camera, they're going down there to fish. It's their favorite spots. So
that's pretty impressive. So there's a good example of government through the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, taking advantage of an improving situation and making it better, so that people have an opportunity to go fish and go fish. Go fish. So let's take a step backwards again to the time of the hatting industry. What exactly did the Still River serve any purpose to them other than a place to dump toxic waste?
Native Americans use it for farming and fertile soil. You don't hear much mention. I've done research in the Danbury Museum stacks, and I've got mentions of the Still River and many, many floods in over 150 years and different storms going on. But hatting is where we next see the river being used to run the machinery.
And now it's sort of making a full circle back. Now, you mentioned, I'm sure a lot of people in the audience have actually seen bits and pieces of the Still River as they drive around, because it sort of parallels a lot of Route 7, so it's pretty visible in a lot of areas. Start us up in New Milford. Is New Milford where it actually begins?
No, the river begins at Sanford's Pond in the Farrington Woods property, which the city of Danbury acquired as open space very recently, 193 acres, so go Danbury.
And it runs backwards? It runs northbound to New Milford? Or?
It goes westbound to eastbound, and it turns north at the Still River Greenway, where the Holiday Inn is on Newtown Road, and that's where the Still River Greenway and boat launch are. And the Lime Kiln Brook, which runs from the wastewater treatment plant, connects to the Still River. And from there it goes north, away from its source, so downstream but really upstream into Brookfield and New Milford. And it's not uncommon for rivers to run, I guess you could say, backwards, but it's pretty cool, and people like that. There's a Still River of no relation in Farmington, which does the same. And the most famous one would be the Nile, which runs 3,000 miles away from its source to the
And I think, I was under the impression growing up that the Nile was really, in fact, the only real river in the world that actually runs away from the equator.
Right.
And yet now we find out that there's something very special about our own Still River, that it runs kind of in a direction that we don't anticipate it would be running in. Is it because the topography is so relatively level? Does that have anything to do with it?
I don't know. It doesn't really drop that much from Still River Greenway to Lover's Leap, right before Lover's Leap.
Yep, we all know where that is, where the bridge is up in New Milford.
If I recall correctly, I think it's 97-foot drop, which is not a lot. I could be wrong, but I feel like that's the number in my head right now.
That's pretty interesting. And what exactly, what purposes does the Still River serve for recreation, besides, as you mentioned, fish, stocking with fish?
Well, there's many groups that are involved in New Milford and Brookfield and Danbury. There's the Housatonic Valley Paddle Club, which lead tours free of charge, and they provide boats for people in passive recreation. There's fly fishing, there's trout fishing, there's biking and walking along the trails that they're trying to complete trails along the river all the way up. There's bird watching. The Still River Alliance is really partnering with a lot of local organizations to get more people out of their cars and out of their houses into nature. And the Still River is an urban river, and it's one that you see outside of your car if you're walking down the street, but you're not sure if that river is the river that we all know about. It's kind of meanders its way through marshes and forms out of a lake and gets channeled through the city, and before you know it, it dumps into the Housatonic and eventually Long Island Sound and Atlantic Ocean, all from a little tiny spring in the western edge of Danbury.
Are there any parts of the Still River where it seemingly disappears?
Yes. Let's see. It goes under the city of Danbury in a couple spots. But it forms out of Sanford's Pond, and there's a little section of non-public lands, but there's a little marsh area, and you can actually, I have plenty of pictures and video where it actually forms out of the marsh into a river. It just naturally knows to.
So it percolates under the ground and then finds its way to some other spot and percolates back up? Is that what happens?
I guess you could say that. I mean, Lake Kenosia and Sanford's Pond share the same underground aquifer. So Lake Kenosia is the Still River, which many people don't really know.
That would be of interest to my good friend Robert Garavell, who spends a lot of time over at Lake Kenosia. If it goes underground and comes back up, how do you know that it's the same body of water? How do we know?
I'm not a water quality expert, but I guess pH balance and species.
Okay, so you get similar species at one end or another of where it goes under and comes back up. Water that you mentioned pH balance, the acidity or lack of acidity of the water is consistent from where it goes under to where it comes back up.
Right. I mean, it doesn't really go under for that much. I'm just saying, like, in certain spots where the city has built civilization over it with asphalt and parking lots is what I meant. Yeah.
And then it actually somehow found its way under that asphalt or under that.
It was there first. The humans came afterwards and kind of ruined it.
Because I guess we used to figure that with things like we used to call them swamps instead of marshlands.
Right.
That there was no problem in building over and paving over it.
Which is bad for runoff and storms and water quality, because you build enough and things leak and they go right down into the water course and pollute it. And over time, it can lead to bad things happening to wildlife. And
so the Still River goes underground, comes back up, and continues on its way, and goes. How long does it go? Is it about I would guess
from the western edge of Danbury to the center of town is about 5.5 miles. Just about 5 miles, and then the downtown channel is about 1.2 miles. That was submerged after the 1955 floods.
Yeah.
And I've actually walked in there before, and so is Steve Rodney Dow, if you're watching.
Yeah.
He's actually took my idea and decided to walk it before I did in my hip boots.
Oh yeah, Rodney helps us out occasionally on the Saturday morning vigil. He comes and visits us.
Danbury's first environmentalist.
Yeah.
Moved here in the 50s and has been causing trouble ever since.
or as we like to say, protecting the environment since the 50s. Now you mentioned 55. That was one of the great hurricanes which struck Connecticut. I think it was one in 1938 that blew across Long Island and did a tremendous amount of damage here. And then in 55 we had a hurricane which had a very devastating effect, at least in terms of a lot of flooding in Danbury.
Right.
And I guess the downtown in Danbury was pretty much underwater for a period. And that's where the Army Corps of Engineers came in. And what did they do? What did they do to make the Still River blend better with the human environment?
Well, people had built their businesses up on top of the river, and would dump their bathroom waste into there, dump all their waste into there. So human beings really, really were challenging Mother Nature, and they were getting their butts kicked in the process. So Army Corps of Engineers moved in after 55 and got the permits and portions near the rail yard. They moved the river a little bit, changed the water course just a little bit, and submerged it in a large concrete channel which would never flood again.
Which is what's downtown in Danbury.
Right, it goes from Crosby Street to just before the Casper Street Bridge.
And that's another thing that people really, kind of drive past on a regular basis and maybe don't think about what the heck that thing actually is. And you're explaining to me what that actually is. It's
another world down there.
Yeah. Have you ever been on some of those underground things?
Sure.
What's down there? I mean, what's it look like? I mean,
a lot of wildlife, a lot of plants, a lot of garbage. Not as much garbage as you'd think. The water's pretty. There's a couple deep spots at 5 feet of water, but most of it is about 6 inches deep.
Okay, so it's a rather shallow river.
Right. That's in the channel.
Except when?
Except when it floods, of course, which is my favorite.
Oh my gosh! How deep does it get when it floods?
Depends on where you are in the water table. Depends where the floodplains are. But Federal Road this past March, when we got double wallops with like 5 inches of rain, it makes people wonder where they complain when the river floods.
Yeah.
They don't know anything about the river, but they complain when it damages them economically or inconveniences them for being in traffic for too long. But the rest of the time, when they're not being inconvenienced monetarily, they could care less about the river. And I think that's where the disconnect happens.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to, I think, reconnect that disconnect a little bit.
The channelization actually happened from the late 50s up until 1979. It was done in 3 phases. And another Comcast shout-out, Bob Brought, he actually helped me out tremendously with a DVD that no one seems to have, and I'm going to share it with everyone, which is pictures of the flood, which I have.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Bob. But it's also got colorized video from 1955 of people fishing in downtown Danbury in the street. And it's got video from 1955 colorized, and it's
actually fishing. But I guess that the fish are in the water, and the water rises. I guess the fish rise along with it.
They do. Wow, it's very surreal.
So take us through some of these channels again. When you say the water level is really low, what do you mentioned? You see some fish in there. You'll see some garbage in there. What other types of life live in that environment when the water's normally low?
Well, we were doing the Still River Greenway cleanups. We're filming and taking part in them in New Milford and Brookfield and Danbury back in April and May and June. March, April, and May, I'm sorry. And Meg actually was doing something called a rapid bioassessment, where she gets in the water and she's got her list of species, and she goes to a skiffle, I remember the word, and she goes in and tests the water quality and looks for certain types of species, and she actually found a black crayfish that looks like a scorpion, actually. And I didn't know what that was, and she couldn't believe it either because it wasn't on her list.
I've seen crayfish.
Yeah, it's small.
In Virginia, well, I would describe it as being kind of a really, really tiny lobster, about a couple inches long at most.
Right.
They eat them in New Orleans, if I say it correctly, yeah. So she found a crayfish or more than one crayfish?
Well, I guess it would lead to a bigger population, but she found maybe 3-inch long black crayfish.
Yeah, and they look very similar to scorpions or to small lobsters.
They do, and you'll see box turtles and snapping turtles along the trail, and foxes. And Still River Greenway goes from under Jack Kozachowski's leadership. It goes from the boat launch at Holiday Inn, and it goes. There's a pedestrian bridge, and it ends on the western edge there. Right near Lowe's. It actually goes up to Lowe's Theaters into the Brookfield-Danbury border, and then Brookfield's got some funding to continue along the way.
So it cuts onto the highway right about where Lowe's is, perhaps?
Yes, it starts just west of the Holiday Inn, behind the Sinorama place. Forget the name of the corporation there. And it goes east, and then it goes north. It's about 1.1 miles long. You can kayak the entire length.
And then, as I recall, it goes along Route 7 in Brookfield, behind where
Stu
Leonard's, and behind where Costco wanted to relocate to in the
Larson field.
Larson's cornfield, which drew a lot of environmental concerns because of the Still River and polluting the Still River,
and more asphalt on top of that would just include more runoff and
causing more problems. It's not there, certainly elsewhere.
Yeah, if you have 1,000 cars, however many cars they applied for to have in the parking lot, antifreeze leaks, gas leaks, water leaks, it'll all mix in and go right down into the sewer. It'll go right into the river, and that's just not acceptable.
And begin the undoing of what nature's been spending a long time doing since the hatting industry ended in Danbury.
Right. There was also, when they took a certain amount of phosphorus out of the water treatment process in the mid-90s, that's when the fish populations were thriving, literally overnight. I mean, I know there is phosphorus still used in water treatment, but there's one of the many landmark cases in Danbury that happened besides look for the union label and OSHA requirements and the D.E. Lowy case in 1903. There's another Danbury first, which was Morgan versus Danbury, which I have all these documents at home, and Danbury Common Council minutes from the 1890s in the next room over here.
All dedicated to the Still River.
Yeah, it was a landmark U.S. case where George Morgan sued the city because his land in Beaverbrook was being damaged by all the runoff. And I have actually editorials from the 1880s in the Danbury Evening News where industrialists and farmers joined forces and said, we want our river cleaned up. We can't have sewage like this.
Industrialists and farmers working together for the betterment of not just nature, but for their own interests too.
Right. So he sued to have his land that was being polluted. He wanted justice, and they bought his land. That was their practice. The city bought the land and would relocate them further down. But there were so many settlements going on, and George Morgan finally sued, and it was in court for 6 months or so, and it became a landmark case. Morgan versus Danbury. The city of Danbury lost the case. They said they're going to have the Wolf disinfecting plant. It would cost this much money, and they didn't have to really treat the sewage as long as they cleaned it up and made it nice. They wound up losing in court, and they had to actually install a plant, which was less than they had initially thought, and they wound up saving money. They appealed. In 1896, they lost in Bridgeport, and the court said, the city, you lose, but it paved the way for communities all across the country to have their rivers cleaned up by having a wastewater treatment plant that actually worked for their citizens.
Is it possible that some of those court cases lay the groundworks for the United States actually having an environmental protection agency?
If it did, it took 70 years.
Well, things happen slowly sometimes.
I mean, the Sierra Club started right around that time, 1892, in San Francisco, I believe, or right around there. John Muir, was it? Sierra Club?
John Muir, Sierra Club, yeah.
Then there's also Waterbury, and the Naugatuck River was also really, really damaged and almost as bad as the Still River. Their case, because of the landmark case in Danbury, took 20 years to settle because the Waterbury courts just kept on, dragging it out in the courts until 1920.
What was the purpose, you think, of dragging it out in the court? Why not take the evidence and arrive at a solution? Whose interests were served, do you think, by making the case drag out, if anyone? Is anyone's interest served?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer.
Well, that's that's something that we could throw in the laps of the audience to take a look into, because they can be part of our learning experience. There's a lot to learn about what this all entails. But now, I remember back in the 1970s when the EPA was first in court. Whatever they do when they create a government agency to do a specific task. We had a little body of water on the United States-Canadian border known as Lake Erie. And Lake Erie had pretty frequent fish kills. You'd have literally millions of fish that would float up on the shore. Generally at the United States side, because Canada's not as populous a nation, they didn't have as much industry, as much industrialism on their side of Lake Erie. So they didn't have these fish kills, but they were literally millions of fish would periodically come up on the shore of the United States side of Lake Erie. And I'm happy to report today that Lake Erie is in much, much better condition because of the Environmental Protection Agency. And I guess we don't have to do too much as human beings in order for nature to cleanse itself. Because it sounds like with the Still River, once the poisons stop going into the river from the hatting industry, and once they cut back on the sewage going into the Still River, that somehow or other the Still River and nature began to clean it up and make it healthier again.
That was until people started littering. Because every cleanup you do, the floodplain fills up with hundreds of balls and plastic bottles and styrofoam, and you can clean that up for hours and hours, and it'll come back the next rainstorm.
So there's so much out there that it really would take quite an extended cleanup, it sounds like.
Right, and that's not just saying people are throwing it into the river, but it's coming from downstream and from the floods, and all the water just rushes and pushes it. But
so maybe something people throw in the streets ends up rolling around in the streets and eventually finds its way into a storm drain, which eventually finds its way into a body of water.
There should be no garbage ever on any roadway unless it blows off from a garbage can or a garbage truck. I mean, the amount of garbage that we've seen in the river, we started writing down all the brand names of all the things that we found.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of funny that, not funny, I think it's kind of strange that only easily acquired food and drink and things that are really, really bad for you, health-wise, are found in rivers. You'll never find, like, organic oatmeal, boxes and wrappers, in a river. You'll never find, like, soy milk in the river. You'll find things that are not good and very cheaply made.
It's food that we kind of generically call, what's the word we use? Crap. From fast food restaurants.
But people who litter aren't just any socioeconomic class. Everyone litters, regardless of the color of their skin or the money in their wallet.
With the common denominator being they go to fast food restaurants, and something about fast food restaurants and the food, the quality of the food you eat or lack of the quality, encourages you maybe to just...
I've seen Starbucks lamps and diapers all over the river too.
Yeah.
I think people would rather throw things away in the middle of the street. They'll actually take garbage bags and throw them into a river if they took the effort to actually put stuff in a garbage bag and then throw it in a river. I think that speaks to, someone else will just pick up their mess, and they should really care about the communities they live in and the rivers that run through them.
So it's sort of a laziness that travels completely across any socioeconomic strata completely.
I don't know any hikers and bikers like Bob over here who litter purposely on the road unless it's a banana and that biodegrades. Throw a banana peel here, you're not really damaging anything.
I will confess right here on television that I have thrown a banana peel on occasion out the window of my car. And for that reason, I know that within a week, that banana peel is going to be organic.
Compost.
It's going to be compost. So, but a wrapper from, let's not pick on everybody, but let's just pick on McDonald's specifically.
Okay.
McDonald's wrapper. That's not going to biodegrade for a long time.
Nope.
Obviously, a plastic container, which hopefully now people are starting to recycle, bring back to the store, get their nickel back, recycle, do something with. Plastic doesn't biodegrade for literally thousands of years. So you could probably, I guess, find 10,000 years from now, you might still find a stray plastic bottle in the Still River if nobody's happened to come across it yet, which is kind of telling about not just the material that the people are throwing in, not just about the people that are doing it, but about the fact that that's their legacy.
Right. If
somebody wants to leave a legacy of being that kind of a person, then they should go ahead and throw a plastic jar or a McDonald's wrapper or garbage out. And if they don't want that to be their legacy, they shouldn't do it.
Right. If you care about your children, it's a cliche, it's about the kids, but it really is about the kids.
Yeah. Grandchildren, great-grandchildren, or however many generations you can fit into 10,000 years. Those are the people that are going to be affected by the things that we do as individuals today.
And that's why we're making a documentary about this.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you're out there doing periodic cleanups to at least, no pun intended, stem the flow of garbage in a very beautiful, very wonderful natural waterway, which people take a lot of pleasure out of, a lot of pleasure in.
I didn't really want to be in the movie to do the cleanups, but the more garbage I see in the middle of the water in the floodplain, I just get angrier and angrier that I just got the pick and I just started doing it, and my friends started filming me, and you live the movie. If you're working on it for a year and a half, you become the movie. I really want to give props to the Danbury Cultural Commission. They made their movie. We actually started with a grant last year from them, and we're probably going to get another grant in the next month or so. And the movie couldn't have gone the first year without money from them.
Probably small amounts of money, I imagine. Probably a very small investment that'll do a tremendous amount of good for a tremendous amount of people.
We'll be doing a Kickstarter campaign in the late winter, and we'll be doing local donations from people that we know, and we're not going there yet. We're going to do as much as we can and make it go longer. The production company is Viva la Velorution Films, which is a little bike thing, tongue-in-cheek, as in, which I like saying. My crew is really just 3 people. It's me, and then there's my friend Aurelio Maraca from Danbury. He's a director. You might know him. And then there's
Victor or Patsy's son.
I forgot their first names, so I think you're right.
Okay.
Probably the only Maracas around, so yes.
Could very well be. Yeah,
and then Renato Guillo, and he runs rmedia.tv, our media in Danbury. They're a production studio, and they do commercials for people all over the globe.
I guess the point being that these are our kids and our grandkids that are doing this film in order to benefit future generations.
But it's not a boring, quirky, by-the-book documentary, because those get a little yawning.
Yeah.
You know, it's a little Albert Maysles, it's a little quirky, it's historic, environmental, and a little quirky, too. You need to throw some humor in there and kind of emulate other directors and make people realize they're not just learning, because learning can be boring sometimes.
So it's truly an educational type of documentary, in the sense that you could take a lot more out of it than just the facts of the river and its cleanup and its history. You could take a little something out of it. You could watch it and learn a little something about filmmaking.
Right, and there's quirks to it. We have the key stakeholders in the movie that we've worked with people all over the community. But then we have, we interviewed hatters at the senior center last summer, and that was really fun. But there's also a little laughter to be had.
When is this movie going to come to fruition?
We're halfway through production right now. There's still post-production and local scoring of music. I'd say a good year should happen. We'll take it to some film festivals all around the country and get Danbury out there and promoted.
That's pretty fantastic, to get Danbury promoted and get a good, basic, caring thought and a good idea floated out there. Because I'm sure that there are probably still rivers. As you mentioned, there's a still river elsewhere in Connecticut. I can imagine probably that every state probably has a still river, the same way that I think 48 states in America have a Bethel. Right. I'm sure there's a lot of states that have a still river too, and probably could learn something about how to deal with their still river from how we could deal with our still river.
I want to also thank props to Bike Express in Danbury and the Mercurial that Amanda Bloom runs.
Yep.
And if I'm forgetting anyone, I'm sorry, but we only have so much time to talk.
Yeah, well, we'll probably come back and do a second show. Oh, we've got a minute left. We're gonna wrap it up. Leave us with a couple of thoughts for this show, and then we'll come back and maybe talk a little bit more about some similar type situations.
The thoughts are self-promotion. Facebook.com/stillflowingthemovie.
Still Flowing the Movie.
Twitter, still_flowing. You'll see it on the screen here.
Underscore rather than the hyphen.
Correct.
Okay.
Email is stillflowingmovie@gmail.com. And thank you for inviting me on your show.
This has been very enlightening for me, because I try to know a little bit about the environment, but someone like you that spends tons of time on a project like this could be beneficial not just to me, but everybody that garners a little bit of something.
And so can the Danbury Museum, because that's where my home base is. The Research Geek and Diane and Bridget and Levi, they're back from a long furlough, and that place is a gem of our community, and it's made me really glad to have been in that place. There's a lot of good stuff in the stacks.
It's a great community, and making it better. We have fun. And it's
so much for being here, Rick. We're going to be
change the flow a little bit quickly.
props I have to give to the people who brought me here, so I have to always remember.
I want to see if James wants to come out and maybe do a show, because he's got a whole different set of questions, I'm sure.
For who? You or me?
For you?
Well, he was asking me stuff, but I'm like, he was asking me stuff about the environment.
Okay. We'll just tell him you don't want to go there.
No, I'll go there. I'm just saying I have a different perspective on
Okay.
politics and environment.
wait till he comes out of his catacombs. Robert, look at James. Look at James, please. Tell him. We want to see if we want to see if. Okay, Robert. See you in a couple weeks. So cool. He is such a cool guy. He's such a hippie-ish guy. Do you want to take up the more political side of it and do a show and have me monitor it now? Because you and I have different takes on stuff, and you could do it. I don't know. I don't know if I could do it. With Candy's help, I probably could do your job. Maybe. You want to take 5 minutes? Do you want to take a little? Okay. Tell us what you wanted us to talk about in a second show. Give us some guidance.
I mean, not to be insulting, but that was a pretty good show, but you're still kind of getting stuck on your own thoughts rather than letting Dave discuss it.
His transitions were long, but they were there to stop me from going off in other directions. I think I did a good amount of talking.
So you want me to ask him more about his background, his environmental activism?
I mean, not to say, but every show, you're at the beginning, you're not just asking who you are, it's just any conversation you do.
Okay.
Who are you? What's your name?
Okay.
They probably won't even know his name. You put it on the screen, but
Yeah.
you need to go through it for an hour.
Okay, let's do a second show then. Let me do that. Let me ask him to introduce himself and what he's been up to.
I think I'm here with April.
But we'll do and what we can do is we can switch it. We can actually have this next show be show number 1, and the show we just did be number 2.
More in depth? Okay, so you want to back up and get more,
Yeah.
let it go organically, get into Dave's political activism in the past as much as you're comfortable with doing that? And then move back.
I'm an open book. I mean, I don't hold back.
Okay, whatever you're comfortable with. And then move back into the Still River thing, maybe just get into, try to get in the context of some larger environmental issues.
I'm not an expert. This movie is kind of like, well, yeah, I think he didn't ask me, there's not enough time, so it was like, what was the motivation behind it?
Okay.
Yeah, that would be
Because how it came about was actually a mistake. Not a mistake, it's more like a funny type shoot. I want to mix, yeah.
You just sort of fell into it, in other words.
That would be great, yeah. That would be
I had a 2-minute idea for a film that became this. But it initially started with a channelization of me. Because after the film festival and working in media and film, one day I'm like, we're having bikes in Danbury, bikes everywhere. But the channel underground, okay, maybe if I put my bike down there, a bike, and my friend follows me to the camera on the right away.
James wanted me to ask you about the future of the Still River also.
Well, that should follow naturally. I mean, you want to try to, you want the show to develop organically or whatever, that was okay. But, there was some questions or something that I hope might come up. If you reach a flat spot, it's going to come down.
Yeah.
But I think if you start off by asking Dave about his background, let him grow from that, like that idea for Still River, that would set naturally from asking about his background, his resume, his lead activity zone, and that would lead to the question of about everything about it. Sometimes. Not easy.
You're the producer?
Okay. He's the director. But our jobs are sort of interchangeable. You're as much a producer as I am, certainly.
Because I got
maybe more.
Our film, everyone's got a couple different jobs to grow up with the same thing. So there's 2 editors, there's 2 directors, but there's 1 director of photography, but the director's also DP, so it's like we all have the same friendship and organic experience together. So we don't
that's putting it mildly. Same thing, only better. Only we're going to talk about his background.
Yeah, it's a treat.
Okay. I think plenty of time because this is 20. I think I have plenty of time because can't we see?
Started a quarter after.
Yeah, it was so quarter after we were done. Yeah.
I was actually up on the ladder filming a friend last week. She was going to start.
Okay.
Okay.
See you in a couple weeks. I'll see you on Friday. I'll see you Friday night. 6 o'clock for... Poetry. Okay.
All right.
I've been trying to get more people involved in this because we really winnowed down to basically Jeff Thomas, James, Mike Tower, and myself. For really two years, we've been pretty much 4 guys doing the show. And Jeff got burned out and he quit. Which left it to pretty much James and me. And you can do a show with 2 people. A guy like James can handle that entire studio and the campus and everything. But we're just trying to expand outward to get more people. We had 10 people who took the class with us. And out of 10, we only had 4 that actually really did anything.
That's about right.
Yeah, pretty much, I guess. I shouldn't have been expecting any more than that. But we need to get more people in here. We need to get some new